Welcome as I continue my countdown of the top 101 comics of 2025. If you've not checked out the previous video, go ahead and do that because I go over all the logistics, all that stuff. Today's video, I'm getting right to the countdown as we get to number 75. And at number 75, I have One World Under Doom, and yes, I will have some Marvel books on this list. Do not worry, DC fans, your time is coming as well. I can completely understand if someone were to dismiss the series considering the amount of different events Marvel has put out over the years. This is one that actually worked for a number of major reasons, starting with the talent involved. Ryan North's run on Fantastic Four has long been one of Marvel's best books, so having that foundation definitely helped. Beyond that, making Doom the central character made it a lot easier to make this event mean something. For one, they didn't have to overly manufacture some new threat that comes out of nowhere to become the most powerful force in all of the Marvel universe. This was just Doom with an upgrade that made sense with his past lineage. This guy knows how to take power from other people. Plus, it was able to be a story that was heavy on character. This was mostly an exploration into the psyche of the character of Doom, and since he contains multitudes, there's plenty of material to look at, from his relationship to key characters like Reed Richards to some intriguing questions to ask and answer. Was he actually trying to do good? Did his ends justify the means? What is the final plan? Any good event needs a good artist, and R.B. Silva very much stepped up with this series. I've enjoyed his work over the past, but the opportunity to take on a major storyline like this must have inspired him because he did some of the best work of his career. I have to also shout out colorist David Carell as well. When I think back to this run, the first thing I think about is how he used to color green to make Doom's presence throughout this issue feel so overwhelming. It is easy to criticize events when they go wrong, and they do tend to miss more than they hit. One World Under Doom, though, was definitely a hit for me. Even some of the side books were good as well, like Red Hook and The Runaways. Marvel is definitely not in the most inspiring place right now. At least it gave us something worth reading with this event. At number 74 is Powers 25, published by Dark Horse Comics. Legacy sequels are all the rage in movies, TV shows, and yes, even comics. Most of the time, they do more to hurt your view of the original run than help. So despite being a fan of Powers, part of me wondered if this could bring back what was so great about it in the first place. Clearly, based on its placement, the answer to that is yes. A big reason why it works is because Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Avon-Oeming clearly went into this with the mindset that this was the first Powers book ever, and not to overly rely on the goodwill or story of what came before. That accomplished two major goals. First, being very welcoming to new readers, so if you've not read it before, you can jump in with this run no problem. The second, being it lives up to the quality of what came before, both in writing and art. If you are a previous reader, you still get a sense that this is a living world that has changed since the last time we revisited it. We get new characters, some returning as well, but also a new status quo that allows for new types of conflict that I'm still excited about. So sometimes you can go home again and things are just as good as before. At number 73 is My Perfectly Imperfect Body, written and drawn by Debbie Tong, published by Andrews McMeel Publishing. One of the best aspects of comics is how it can be the ultimate tool for people to tell their story. There's a straight line connection from the creator to the consumer that allows the creator to be direct with their words and honest with their visuals. This is the case with Debbie Tong's graphic novel, My Perfectly Imperfect Body, that depicts her struggles with her eating disorder. This is Debbie telling her story as a teenager and high school student, wrestling with her self-image and learning how to love herself. It starts small, like a side comment from her mother about eating too much and watching her figure, having someone take notice of a small imperfection that quickly garners all the attention in your mind. The world can be a cruel place, especially when it comes to young girls, and Debbie is open and honest with how those struggles impacted her on a deep emotional level. Brave often gets tossed around a bit too much when it comes to art. It can be subscribed to things that really do not take much bravery at all to complete. Considering this consists of a person opening themselves up to reveal their deepest regret and insecurities, I think it's warranted. Our culture is full of people who seemingly live off tearing people down in the harshest way possible. To show that level of vulnerability is not easy. That's why it works though, because she's so open with her story, showing how from the outside her addiction to exercise and precise eating choices can seem like a healthy way to live, but it's a slow progression because she couldn't stop no matter what she did, and all she could see what was wrong with herself, until slowly and surely she learned to love what she saw and what she was looking at. Art can teach us many lessons, and My Perfectly Imperfect Body teaches us one of the most important: how to love yourself, how perfection is a frivolous pursuit, and ultimately we must accept ourselves first, despite what the world might think, positive or negative. At number 72 is Lucas Wars, published by First Second. Not that long ago, in a galaxy that we're in, Star Wars came out and forever changed the landscape of movies and entertainment. What might be even more fascinating than Star Wars is the story of its creation. That is chronicled in Lucas Wars by Lauren Hopman and Renard Roche. The first question you may be asking is, considering the amount of making of documentaries and coverage surrounding Star Wars, is it really going to find new ground or information that has not been covered before? Perhaps for the most learned Star Wars fan, there's nothing new here, but as a more moderate one, I did learn plenty regarding everything it took to make Star Wars into a reality. Appreciated how it took the time to ensure people like sound engineers to extras and Lucas's friends and family got credit for the role they played. Furthermore, what is most important is what it doesn't do. Comics like this can often come off as Wikipedia articles that are just an assortment of fun facts that throw some illustrations together and call it a day. This is much more of a narrative story than it is a docucomic. Not that this is making up information, but rather using reality to tell a tale about the power of determination and the remarkable things that can happen with a little luck, ingenuity, and an assortment of some of the most talented filmmakers ever to come together. We come to learn who George Lucas is beyond the filmmaker status and what drove him as a person to be so certain Star Wars would work. Seeing how he was a slacker kid of dreams of being a race car driver, but then used a near-death experience of an awful car crash as reasons to make something of his life. Renard Roche's cartoon is exactly what you need for comics of this ilk. People look as they should, but never photorealistic, so the personality and emotion aren't removed. Also seem well aware of the fact that this is a type of comic that will attract readers who may not be used to the format, so it's super easy to follow with a basic grid structure. Even the most novice can easily follow the story with ease. Star Wars may be the subject, but it's ultimately not the point. If you're a fan, a person who enjoys other Star properties, or someone has little interest in this world altogether, you will still find a tale about the power of hope in a time when the entire world seems against you. A message as important now as ever. At number 71 is I Wish I Didn't Have to Tell You This, published by Candlewick Press. What is it like to live under an oppressive regime? For some reason, that question seems to be becoming more and more relevant these days. It's important as ever to learn from the past to understand the fragility of freedom. Eugene Yeltsin's latest I Wish I Didn't Have to Tell You This uses influences from his own past to show you what life is like when you can control so little of it. Although based in reality, the story is fiction and follows the character of Georgie, who has an infatuation with the United States and a tendency to take life as it comes. He is a painter and attends art shows despite the fact that they're not government approved. His thinking being the KGB has bigger fish to fry than a small art show. Slowly, his invincibility shields begin to dissipate as the harsh and dangers of reality head closer and closer to home. Despite having to hide the fact that he is Jewish, he doesn't really seem to mind because it's never really been important to him anyway. He lives by the infamous mantra, "It is what it is," but he finds out that you cannot hide who you are because the world won't let you. This being based on Eugene Yeltsin's life, it feels as much as a confessional as it does a depiction of events. There's an element of regret woven into his words and art. I could imagine this must have been a therapeutic experience, and that honesty makes for a much more effective story. At number 70 is Silenced Voices, Reclaiming the Memories from the Guatemalan Genocide, published by HarperCollins. YA comics are the biggest market going right now, and despite their massive popularity, they often get overlooked or typecast as being nothing more than comedic stories about dogmen. But the truth is, there's plenty that touch upon difficult subjects even adults don't fully understand. This being one of the best examples. As a parent, it's instinctual to want to protect your children from physical and emotional harm, although sometimes that protection can go too far as you try to have them maintain their innocence for as long as possible. Such is the case for Clara within this story. One day, her kids come home from school asking about the genocide trials going on in Guatemala. Knowing that's where their mom is from, they realize they never hear her talk much about it. At first, their curiosity leads her to angrily reject their request. In her mind, they need to be focusing on their own lives. Eventually, she walks them through her past trauma as they learn about an aunt they never knew. This is a fictional story based in reality that speaks to the horrors of the past as much as it does the present. Being a work suitable for younger audiences, it's a tool as much as it is a work of art. Considering the state of the world we live in and the genocides occurring in the Congo, Sudan, Gaza, it can be utilized to provide insight into what exactly that means, how it happens, and why it's vital not to ignore these events. Certainly all these events are different, but what remains universal is the amount of innocence lost. It takes a finely tuned hand to be able to approach something so serious in such a delicate way, and that is something Pablo Leon has when telling this tale. The framing of it being a mother telling her story to children helps in designing a story that allows her kids to be educated and knowing the truth, but not saturating it with graphic details to the point where they're simply reliving that trauma themselves. Silence Voices does as the title indicates, as it reclaims the past by refusing to ignore it in a way to remember those that were lost and empower those who survived to know their story matters and deserves to be shared. This is a type of comic you hope to see in middle and high school libraries to educate kids on the perils of history and what can happen to unchecked power. At number 69 is The Girl Who Flew Away, published by Iron Circus Comics. You don't see this type of drama anymore. The Girl Who Flew Away by Lee Dean follows Greer Johnson, whose recent pregnancy has caused her to move to Florida with people she doesn't know that well. Personality clashes, unacquainted love, and dreams of a better world help make up this simple drama about life. Lee Dean indicated they wanted to create a story about characters that are typically side quests in other works of fiction. You can certainly see that, as Greer is a young secretary who had an affair with a married man with kids. That is the main reason she has moved in with relative strangers. She needs to hide herself as if she was alone in those actions. I can certainly see a story being told that focuses on the father of the story as he tries to keep his life together despite his mischievous actions. Greer's story is one of longing and rejection, but also learning how to make the world her own. There's so much loneliness in these pages, as Greer is treated like a pariah rather than a victim. This takes place in the 1970s, and much of the social norms of that time are represented well, mostly in the way society judges women far harsher. Greer's only connection comes in her dreams of a young girl, along with the house gardener, who seems to be the only person who sees her without judgmental eyes. The color palette here captures the 70s atmosphere to an astounding effect. Pages are covered in yellow, brown, and oranges, so much it feels like you're visiting your great aunt's house that hasn't been redecorated since the bicentennial. The choice of designing the book in landscape aspect ratio also gives it an aura of flipping through an old photo album, looking back at a world that used to be. Dean's character design is intriguing as well. Greer's face is a bit round and with a cartoonish shape, but also full of vivid expression. Like the general drama of this book, the art style has its feet in a lot of different worlds. It's not overtly realistic, but also still true to life. The Girl Who Flew Away reminds me a great deal of late 60s and 70s dramas like The Graduate that made a point to create a world filled with people you see in everyday life. The type of drama doesn't try to become too big, but at the same time can remain compelling. Some may find the deliberate pace and lack of explanation about key details difficult to get over. If you're looking for a patient drama about people who tend to be stepping stones in other people's journeys, getting an opportunity to shine in their own tale, the vibe here will suit you quite well. At number 68 is Minor Arcana, published by Boom Studios. Minor Arcana is Jeff Lemire at his best, a story about a broken person returning to a broken family, raised in a broken home, taking place in what is clearly a very broken city. I enjoy Jeff Lemire as a writer, but tend to think he does his best work when he's writing and drawing as well. The lives the characters have lived are written all over their faces. The highs, the many lows, as well as desire to find some assortment of peace. Despite his limited use of lines, he evokes so much emotion. This year we also got a few issues drawn by Letizia Kananishi, and while on the onset I was disappointed, I came to appreciate what she brought to the series. Her style is different from Lemire, which is the right choice rather than getting someone that just feels like a cheap copy. Despite the style differences, it evokes many of the same emotions. Really enjoyed some of the plot developments as well, like Vicky's budding relationship. The scene with her and Miles on the bench expressing their feelings for one another is one of my favorite moments of the series thus far. A welcome reprieve from some of the darker elements of this book. I do not know how long Lemire plans on keeping the series alive. I hope it's a while, because now that we're 12 issues deep, these characters are so vivid and well designed, and this seems like it's just taking shape. People that seem rather easy to figure out at first are turning out to be much more complicated. The more fantastical elements have so much promise. It feels like we just dipped our toe into what's really happening, and considering how much I've enjoyed this series thus far, that's a great thing. At number 67 is Bitterroot: The Next Movement, published by Image Comics. I was living well in 2025 as a comic book fan because so many of my favorite creators came out with new books, and a lot of my favorite series made their return. Loved the first run of Bitterroot and was so happy to see it return yet again. The story opens up in Mississippi in the 1960s as a bust of freedom riders is attacked, but this is not a normal attack. The question is not who, but what has done it. Taking place a few decades after the original Bitterroot series, a new generation of Sangri family has been tasked to investigate this disturbance to see what type of literal monsters are responsible. While the time and setting may have changed, the core of what made Bitterroot such a strong series has remained. At its heart, it's a story about the racial and prejudicial systemic issues that can rot away the foundation of society if not addressed. They are simply using the supernatural allegory to approach such issues. What we are seeing within this new volume is an old enemy in new form. That certainly makes sense considering this is a story that's taking place during the height of the civil rights movement. As so many were trying to push forward, others were pushing back even harder. What is also returning here is a fantastic artwork of Sanford Green with colors by Matt Herms. Green is one of those artists who has every tool a creator needs. His characters are distinct, well designed, and drawn with vivid emotion. His page designs are creative and lively, and he knows how to make any scene dynamic no matter what is happening. I swear, no one gets more out of a single page than him because every piece of the page is used for something. Herms' colors complement all those skills so well, and when you add in letterer Hossan Osemi-Elio, you have one of the best creative teams top to bottom. You can easily jump into this if you've never read Bitterroot before. There are some connections to the past series, but it very much stands up on its own. Similar to the original run, the time frame, location, cultures of the day are massively important to the makeup of this book. That allows for both installments to be of one big piece while still being complete on their own. At 66 is System Preference, published by Titan Comics. I really hate the term content when it comes to describing art. It makes it seem like this disposable property that we are just adding to massive piles to be disregarded at a later date. System Preference brings us to a future where that's exactly what's happening, set into not too distant future where the greatest resource is data storage and there's very limited supply left. Our main character is an archivist who's responsible for permanently deleting art deemed no longer necessary to make room for important material. Who needs to ever watch a film called 2001: A Space Odyssey ever again when there's pictures of people's meals they didn't eat to look at? However, he's trying to do good by illegally saving material inside his robot surrogate despite the dangers involved. Science fiction is at its best when it's used as a funhouse mirror on the current state of the world, and that's what's happening here. Despite having a pretty dense narrative in terms of theme, it is a very brisk read covering a lot of ground in only a short bit. Perhaps the creators realized that there's value to limited space. Could this have been an episode of Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone? Certainly it shares a lot of similar elements, but it does not read like a failed TV script forced to become a comic. It reads like a comic through and through, especially with its visual language. If you do enjoy those shows, especially Black Mirror, I do think you'll dig this. At number 65 is Absolute Batman, published by DC Comics. I hope DC fans weren't getting too nervous that I forgot you because DC books have certainly made this list and more to come. Despite this being a celebration of books I enjoyed last year, I feel like I need to talk about what I did not enjoy with this work because I'm probably ranking it a lot lower than others. Clearly, I enjoyed it. It would not have made this list otherwise, but to spoil my list yet again, I found myself enjoying other Absolute books and other Batman books a bit more this year. For one, I still feel like this Bruce Wayne is a bit of an unknown considering how many issues we've gotten thus far. He's this big brute force of nature, but my issue is I never connected to him on a character level quite yet. Beyond that though, the Mr. Freeze arc did not work for me at all, and despite loving Marcos's Martine art, his style just did not quite sync up with the overall vibe of this universe. So considering that, I couldn't put it higher than this. So now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about what I enjoyed, which is pretty much everything else. For one, I am a big Nick Dragotta fan, as East to West is up there as one of my all-time favorite books. I love seeing him get a breakout title like this, as he's really the one that's been a driving force of the series since its start. He's been able to take this character that has existed since 1939 and redefine him for a new generation. Not easy to do. Scott Snyder's been doing great Batman, and that's not a surprise. I know before this came out, some people were bummed Snyder was writing it, since he's written so much Batman over the years. I was excited though, because I thought Snyder was actually doing the best work of his career, and wanted to see what lessons he learned working on those creator-owned books. Clearly, those lessons were well learned, as this is one of the biggest things in comics right now. And while Marcus's Martine's turn in the Absolute world did not work for me, Gabriel Hernandez Walt's work very much did, and the issue he drew remains one of my favorite of the run thus far. So I understand many may take issue where I rank this on the list, but going off of my personal experience, it would be a lie for me to rank it much higher. It's great if you feel otherwise, and I'm sure it will be fine for 2026 in the years to come as well. It's the biggest thing in comics at the moment. At number 64 is Dogsred, published by Viz Media. It's like they made an entire manga series based upon that one scene from Mighty Ducks 2, and honestly, it's working. Dogsred is a sports manga about Ryu Sarakawa, who is on his way to become an Olympics figure skater, but when he competes and has a meltdown at an event, he becomes disgraced from the sport. Now, the reason behind his meltdown is a little understandable, as it's most likely the result of the tragic passing of his mother. In order to escape from everything, he moves away, but instead he finds himself back on the ice once again. After a rough encounter with members of the local hockey team, he reluctantly joins the team despite having no knowledge of the sport. Perhaps it's a ticket to regaining his love of competition yet again. To be honest, when I think of hockey, my first thought is not Japan. Canada or Russian maybe, but this shows it's far more worldwide than I realized. Now, if you've never watched or played hockey before, there is a great benefit since you get to learn alongside Ryu and how the game is played. Sports stories are filled with cliche, and it's the one genre where you kind of want to see it the most. You want to see that underdog with an endless amount of emotional baggage take on and defeat the mighty juggernaut of ultimate power. Not to mention the sheer beauty of a sports montage, although we haven't gotten one of those yet. Dogsred certainly has some of that, Ryu getting involved with a failing school in an ice hockey team that has decades-old equipment, but even by Volume 2, it becomes more than just a David vs. Goliath story. Of course, when it comes to sports manga, the biggest question is, how well is the sport represented within the art? Hockey is both beautiful and brutal, and that is represented well within the art. The violence, the grace, and the speed feel true to life when captivating sequences of struggle and triumph. I do not know how big the Venn diagram is of manga and hockey fans, but even if you've never watched a hockey game in your life, there's plenty to enjoy with this. Ryu, being an outsider of the game as well, will ease you into the most novice sports fan, and who knows, perhaps after this you'll find yourself checking out some NHL games just to see how well this brings the sport to life. At number 63 is Batman Dark Patterns, published by DC Comics. See that, DC fans? You do not have to wait long for your next book, and as I mentioned, even more Batman, not that he needs more love. I'm okay with more Batman books though if they're this good. A lot of what works with this are the small things, like it has a 12-issue series with 4 3-issue arcs. I didn't even know that was an option. What it's allowed to do is have a series that both can cover a lot of ground, but storylines that never overstay their welcome. We get a comic where Batman being a detective is a major part of the story, that even included some homages to classic 1960s Batman series that did not feel out of place whatsoever in this more modern tale. Once I saw Hayden Sherman draw Batman walking up the side of the building, could not help but cheer. Speaking of Hayden Sherman, they are my comic book artists of 2025 because of this book, among other series that may be coming out on this list later on. You can probably do the math to determine what that title is. Sherman creates page layouts that remind you of why the medium of comics is so special. How storytelling is not just about what happens in the panels, but how those panels are arranged, as they could be designed in a way to further the atmosphere or deepen the themes. That's what happened within this book again and again, and allowed it to stand out in a massive sea of Batman books. At number 62 is Tedward, published by Fantagraphics. Imagine the awkwardness of Tin Robbins, but with a British sensibility. That's the best way I can describe Tedward by Josh Pennegar. This is a collection of short stories that follow Tedward through a number of life encounters of the strange, weird, and indifferent. Pennegar's style lives in the same neighborhood of classic underground work you would get in series like 8-Ball or Zap Comics. Books that look to subvert both the norms of society and storytelling with the unexpected actions that will occur moment to moment. They live in this nebulous place and time, never anchored too much beyond the desire to keep you guessing and challenge norms. Tedward is a sheepish figure who can be his own worst enemy, as he's way too nice for his own good sometimes, like how he will be brought into the world of power washing that ends up being a job that is of the worst order. Describing why exactly that would be is a way to get this taken off YouTube. He still finds himself unable to do the logical thing and run away as fast as possible, or when he does stand up for himself, it's all for the wrong reasons, like narking on his girlfriend regarding her illegal use of television. Pennegar has a knack for getting the part of your brain that feels awkward but also just wants to keep you going to see what it leads. Often that journey gets beyond the absurd, and he's quite the cartoonist. To sound perhaps a bit primitive, he can draw funny. Tedward's facial expressions tend to be of varying degrees of befuddlement, as if he exists in this constant state of confusion. Humor is all about rhythm, timing, and expression, and the same goes for comics. This has figured that formula out. Tedward is not a book that is going to work for everyone, and that's by design. It knows what it is, and it's not ashamed to be that, even if it should be at times. And because of that, you'll know rather quickly if this is something that's going to click with you. If you don't enjoy it by the first few pages, I do not see that changing by page 50. It worked for me though. Your mileage may vary. At number 61 is Fault Lines, published by Ablaze. Anytime an artist from another medium moves over to comics, I tend to get worried, especially when that person is coming from the world of film or TV. Do they have good intentions regarding comic books? Are they simply using it as a way to gain interest so it can be made someplace else down the line? I cannot speak to Robert Cullen's intentions. Despite my many attempts, I have no superpowers yet that would grant me such an ability. I can speak to his execution because clearly his work within the world of animation paid off when it came to making this comic. For what I can tell, this appears to be his first published comic, and he's taken to the medium quite well and quite quickly. This comic contains 3 separate stories that all share thematic similarities. The first story is about a mysterious magic act with dark secrets, another about a mother working through her ultimate loss, and lastly, a widow confronts her guilt. Across all 3 stories, Cullen uses magical realism and personal crisis to explore how we deal with trauma, regret, and moments that shake the foundation of our lives. His time in animation clearly informs his art style. With this being such a character-focused story, his ability to render emotion, craft memorable characters were key to making it work. Very clean and lightly detailed lines that have that animated feel. Many fantastic artists have come from the world of animation, and Cullen lives within that same world. I hope he sticks around longer because, despite this being his debut comic, he has a command of the medium of a veteran level. Could only imagine how better things would get in future projects. At number 60 is Shimazki in the Land of Peace, published by Konadasha. Sometimes going through your favorite comics can lead you to learn something about yourself. That happened to me. I found out that the hitman trying to live a normal life genre is one that I very much dig. I guess growing up watching Mr. Nanny had a bigger impact on me than I realized. Shimazki in the Land of Peace is one of those stories, along with another book that will make this list shortly. Again, I really love the spoil this list, don't I? I'd call it foreshadowing, but foreshadowing should be more subtle. This has more of a serious bend to it than you may expect for an idea that seems ripe for the classic fish out of water hijinks. Much of that is because this is a central character who has much more tragedy in his backstory. He was kidnapped by a terrorist organization as a young child, forced to work with them for 30 years, but now he's able to be free and search for peace. Peace, however, has a tendency to play hard to get. Now, this is not void of humor. There's some there and some awkward social interactions. It's just that it's not the point of the story. It may be too slow for some, as it does take its time. It's often about what's not happening or trying to hide what's happening, giving you a chance to just be with these characters. And there's always a sense that something invisible is shaping everyone's behavior. That creeping discomfortment, I think, is where this book shines the most. That and feeling like it's about something despite its absurd setup. At number 59, I have The Murder Next Door, a graphic memoir, published by Street Noise Books. Based on the title, The Murder Next Door, a graphic memoir, I was worried that this was going to be one of those books that tried to jump on the true crime trend. I am pretty sure Netflix just released 3 more multi-part docuseries focusing on the most shocking crimes of all time within the time it took me to write and read this sentence. Luckily, that's not what this is at all. The center of this is not necessarily about the murder, it is rather a vehicle to look at the impact of trauma and how impact is not always immediate. How sometimes you may see something and your mind simply cannot comprehend fully what you are seeing. Immediately you appear fine or just okay, yet that moment lingers with you years and even decades later in ways you don't realize. The limited color palette is very effective, using teal and black to set in a constant mood only for red to sneak in when trauma and tragedy hit, upsetting the normalcy of what has been expected, bringing us into the anxiety of what's being felt. How you get into the mind of someone does not always have to be through words. Despite this not being a true crime book, it does cover the shocking crime that shows you how life can change on a dime. There is a mystery as well, and it's worth exploring, so to say this is not completely void of those true crime tropes would be a lie. They're just well executed. Simply what writer-artist Hugh D'Andrade does is not stop there. He adds to it, gives this meaning beyond just the exploitation of what happens, making it far superior to similar examples within this genre. At number 58 is In the End, We All Die, published by Helvetic. In the end, we all die. Sure, that's a certain reminder regarding the mortality of life, but it's also the name of Tobias Achenbacher's crime graphic novel that was finally translated for English audiences. This German graphic novel, of course, it's German, follows sleazy gangsters on the search of a stolen urn. And as you would think, things don't go as expected within that journey. What separates this from other crime stories is that the events all take place in probably no longer than 15 to 30 minutes plus or minus a flashback or two. We see the initial confrontation as these gangsters burst into an apartment building demanding they get what they are looking for, and quickly things devolve with bullets flying anywhere, including some unexpected locations. The story then takes a step back as we traverse around this apartment complex, learning about all the lives of the other tenants as they slowly get intertwined within the chaos. I know when you're talking about a crime story, referencing people like Quentin Tarantino or Shane Black is overdone and overly forced, but I do think it is apt here. For one, in how this likes to play with narrative structure like Tarantino, and the dialogue here definitely feels akin to Shane Black. Very comedic, heavy on individuals that cannot get out of their own way. Now, no way is this a direct clone, as the style here is quite different, but those specific elements do feel perhaps inspired or at least similar to previous work. The art style here has a sense of humor that reminds me a great deal of someone like Kyle Starks, so if you enjoy his work like Assassination or specifically Kill Them All, I think this book will work for you. There is some fine-tuned economic storytelling because this is a brisk read, yet we get a cavalcade of characters created that are fleshed out with complete identities. The old couple, for example, were perhaps my favorite as they add in some dramatic weight with all the levity that is dominating much of this book. Speaking of which, the pace here may be actually the best skill within this book. It moves moment to moment in organic ways, despite the fact that time is not always moving forward. Breadcrumbs are left and called back upon, so your mind is ready to fill in the gaps that have been left that will further explain what exactly is going on in the next room. In the End, We All Die is a book that's true to its word. With a title like that, you may get the thought that this is a dreary tale full of grit and vinegar about the failings of the human soul. That would be incorrect. Instead, that title is about the inevitability of death and how to find humor in places where it doesn't normally belong. At number 57 is Exquisite Corpses, published by Image Comics. Who does not love a good battle royal? You know, besides wrestling battle royals that tend to be consistent of a multitude of people struggling to throw each other over the rope in the corner until their specific spot becomes available and only to lead to an unsatisfying finish. Those may not be a good time, but when you get a bunch of maniacs in a small town with the only goal to survive, that leads to some kick-ass chaos. There's actually a lot of similarities with this comic and wrestling. Both are consisted of characters with over-the-top gimmicks. Here, though, there's more of a video game spiel as the wealthiest families in the US continue their tradition of determining who is controlled by having a bunch of gun-for-hires kill each other. Basically, The Purge meets Fortnite, just with far less dancing. As a big fan of Michael Walsh's art, so happy to see him in a book like this that's getting both praise critically and fan attention. He's long shown his ability to draw great horror comics, but this is my first experience of seeing him draw a book with so much action. He makes it work, and his background within the horror genre gives everything a hard edge. It has that grindhouse horror feel that makes the violence feel more impactful, very much like a John Carpenter feel, but in the modern age. Usually a book with so many different characters would be rather hard to follow, but by creating characters so distinct, that's not the case. Costume and character design go a long way, again, harking back to wrestling, and that's been one of the best parts of this series, and made it rather fun, exciting, and horrific at times. At number 56 is Poison Ivy, published by DC Comics. This series is a small miracle. For one, the fact that a series starring one of Batman's villains is this good does not happen very often. Also, this series has hit 40 issues, and by the time I'm doing this, been solicited up to 43. That's a rare for any character in today's market, let alone Poison Ivy. So why has it lasted this long? Simple is because it's been that good. Being able to maintain the same creative team, also a miracle. So kudos to G. Will Wilson and Marcio Takara for making that happen. This shows the benefits of having a long-running series, being able to create storylines that gradually build along with characters that can change and develop in meaningful ways. Somehow, Janet from HR has grown into one of my favorite current DC characters, and even had a budding relationship with Killer Croc that is so endearing. Heck, even Killer Croc has been great. Marcio Takara was the exact right artist to put this Poison Ivy book together, being able to render some pretty harsh body horror in a way that's impactful but can still exist within the DC mainline book is not a universal skill. One I'm impressed with each passing issue. Sometimes I worry that DC is not aware they're still publishing this book, and bringing attention to it will lead to its cancellation or getting renumbered back to #1 for no reason. So it may be a risk to call it out, but it's deserving of that recognition for both its quality and being a unicorn in the industry of comics at the moment. At number 55 is The Weight, published by Drawn and Quarterly. Not all wounds heal, especially emotional and psychological ones. Trauma can carry on for generations, and that is explored in Melissa Bendy's The Weight. It is a coming-of-age tale about a young girl growing up in a small town, trying to escape the mistakes of her mother, but discovering it is far more difficult than she realized. The story follows Will Eddy, whose mother was in an abusive relationship. That got so bad that she had to leave and live with her grandparents. Eventually, she's able to find a home with a family she barely knew, as their support gave her the escape that she needed. However, some of her own mistakes along the way lead her down a very similar path she previously lacked. This is a fictional tale, but Melissa Bendy's indicated it is very much inspired by previous work and real-life events. Also brought in elements of her grandfather's childhood. That level of inspiration is apparent, as there is an element of authenticity within the drama. This takes place during the mid-century of rural America and captures that world well. Bendy excels at keeping things simple to focus on the right details. Page design uses a basic 6-panel structure, which yields a quick reading pace, but also helps to highlight the isolation of this tale. Rarely are characters captured within the same panel together, often separated by gutter lines or entire pages. When characters appear together, it is either a moment of violence or a response to those incidents through a moment of warmth. The use of black and white recreates the past, as it looks like you're seeing events that took place during yesteryear. There is also a limited use of lines that give you an idea that someone's looking back within their own memories, almost like a counterpoint to the idea of the American dream that tends to romanticize and simplify this area and time. This shows that perhaps it was not all sunshine and rainbows. The Weight isn't void of heart or positives. It does show the power of a loving parental force and how those forces do not have to be traditional. Most importantly, though, is how it is possible to fight through past misgivings to reclaim your own life. It's not easy, not everyone has the opportunity to do it, and sometimes the only choice you have is to take matters in your own hands to escape the trauma that won't let you go. At number 54 is Ashita Nojo, Fighting for Tomorrow, published by Kondasha. Ashita Nojo, Fighting for Tomorrow is one of the most influential mangas of all time, and it finally got its English release the previous year. Apparently that was successful enough, and more volumes came out in 2025. Some may call this a bit of a cheat, but since this is part of his first English release, I am counting it. It first debuted in 1968, and it follows the aptly named Joe, who wanders the streets of Japan with reckless abandon and a bit of addiction to fighting. Good thing for him is that he's good at it, and his skills get him noticed by a down-on-his-luck former boxing coach who believes Joe has the raw talent to become the next boxing legend. The thing is, Joe doesn't have much interest in doing that. An orphan who's basically been on his own his entire life. He's a bit of a rebel against all causes. He's a mixture of Huckleberry Finn, Robin Hood, and reminds me a great deal of Cool Hand Luke from the Paul Newman classic. He just does not click with society in any way, but has the will that keeps him going beyond all the odds. His unflinching will gains the respect of those who initially cannot stand him, a common occurrence in his life. In Volume 2, the Cool Hand Luke comparison hits even stronger, considering how much of it consists of him being in jail, becoming the boxer he once ran away from. He is a challenging character to root for because of his abrasiveness, but you can also see why he garnered so much fandom when this was originally released. His refusal to back down against a broken system and see through the charity of individuals for what it is probably hit strong. On the art side, it's indicative of the day, but still remains strong nearly 60 years later. Characters are drawn with so much personality. The action is fluid and exciting, and it has to be because there is a lot of it. In the most basic form, this is a long way to get to what's basically a boxing story, but the journey is worth it. If you're someone that likes to learn about the history of comics, advise picking this up because you can see its influences in so much manga today. At number 53 is There's No Time Like the Present, published by Draw and Quarterly. This was one of the last books I read before I did this list, and I'm glad I did because it was such a trip. It starts as the ultimate lo-fi sci-fi story as it takes this big idea of time travel and breaks it down to its most mundane existence. That sounds like the opposite thing you want to do with a story, but society making time travel boring was very much the point. I mean, what would happen if time travel really existed? Well, it probably would be heavily regulated, so only a select few can use it, and those that do have access would probably use it for something silly, like just getting movie and TV shows from the future. It's kind of crazy how accurate this feels regarding how it would probably represent the truth of life. Now, it adds to that as well as it gets into some time paradox situations by the end. It has some interesting questions, not necessarily what happens when you know when you're going to die, but rather what happens if you find out your fate and your life is just going to be boring. It reminded me a lot of the film Another Earth, with his much more sardonic sense of humor. Both have this massive science fiction idea that is really in the background to explore people and the way they live their lives in the face of the fantastical. By the end, though, it does expand its scope to a great deal as it moves from this mundane to the absolute insane. If you're a person who likes science fiction with deep and detailed explanations regarding how everything is happening, this is not this type of read. It doesn't really bother with logistics. It's less interested in science and more concerned with what those things say about who we are as people. At number 52 is Skin Police, published by Oni Press. Back when I talked about Exorcism Island making the list, I mentioned how I'm a big fan of Jordan Thomas. Skin Police is another example of why that's the case, where Exorcism Island is squarely in the horror genre, and this fits into science fiction. You can certainly see its influences of properties like Blade Runner to the Inkle, but it still exists on its own accord. Where Blade Runner focused on replicants, this is all about illegal cloning and cracking down on dupes before they pop and destroy everything around them. It is quite the moral dilemma because these are individuals that do pose a real threat and have caused major harm to innocent bystanders. At the same time, they're still human. You also have the mystery of where the root cause is regarding where this defect comes from. Conflict is at its best when both sides have valid points to build upon, and that's exactly what's happening within this book. Daniel Gett has been a bit of a revelation as well. I do not know if I've ever read a comic he drew before, and the more the series goes on, the more I feel like he's set up to become a major name within the business. He has a great skill for cinematic sequences. For example, there's this great fight scene in front of an elevator, and more recently, a shootout within a dinosaur structure that was tracking the path of the bullet that looked fantastic. I have to also mention Jason Wordie, who operates as co-writer and colorist. As mentioned, you can see the influences of Blade Runner, but the choices here of color palette are the exact opposite of that dreary, wet, neon-lit world. With this, the colors are bright, vibrant, and often use a lot of flat colors as well. To me, this helps set up and represent the facade of this society. On the outside, trying to maintain that everything is normal and functioning as it should. In reality, though, the underneath is far more sinister. And at number 51, and last for today's video, The History of Jerusalem, an illustrated story of 4,000 years, published by Abrams Books. Jerusalem is one of the most important cities in the history of humankind, but even with that, much of the Western world does not know much about it beyond the occasional headline. That is why a comic like The History of Jerusalem can play a vital service. Obviously, with the subject matter, you will have people ready to claim bias or indicate what is presented as a falsehood for the purpose of propaganda. I think this looks to tell the story as is and even calls out situations where differing opinions of facts may occur. Plenty of sources are provided for those who wish to check the facts that are presented. Complete objectivity is always impossible, but this is a piece designed to get to the root causes of what happened to the city over the last few thousand years. Fitting, it is done by having the story told through the perspective of a sacred tree. It speaks to what occurred during its existence. Another risk with a book like this is having a story that is dry, dull, and reads like an info dump documentary your teacher would use for history class when they didn't feel like teaching that day. Instead, it's like going through a well-designed museum with an informed guide that knows how to tell a story while filling in some key details that you may have missed. Christophe Gauthier is the artist here and had quite the task to complete. These are pages packed with information, but the page is designed to do wonders in keeping all that detail organized while keeping the story moving forward. I would describe the art style as a bit bare bones, as there's not a lot of great detail. That also makes a lot of sense because the purpose here is to focus on what is important, and that's what it does. A lot is gleaned through body language and recreations of all the different time periods, and that's not easy to do. Fundamentals may not be the most flashy, but when done right, the impact is massive. We live in a time and place where context is more important than ever. Often issues or events will be presented where zero context is given purposely, especially when someone is trying to convey only their side. The history of Jerusalem is not suddenly going to make you an expert on the Middle East, but it will provide a lot of context that's been absent from today's media and even the education system we find ourselves in. Now, this isn't just a textbook in comic book form because there is craft and artistry here. Writer Vincent Lemire and artist Christophe Gauthier are using these events to get to a grander point about civilization, how it progresses, so even those that are not yearning for historical comics will find something important to be gained. But that is it for this video. Come back for part 3 as I go through numbers 50 through 26.